Welcome to Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods. I am your host, Corey Nathan. This is where we get to speak with the brilliant and creative people who make the greatest coming attractions, movie posters, and digital campaigns of all time. This program is brought to you by the Golden Trailer Awards and Audio Machine, by Brent Allen Hagel, you know as Trailer VO Brent, and our newest partner, Soundstripe. And today I am so pleased to be joined by Peter Campbell, creative director at Wildcard Creative Group. You know, for all the years I've known you, I don't think I've ever called you Peter. So
Nope. I've never heard that before. I was like, oh, am I Peter now? Must be an age thing. I've finally
yeah.
matured into it.
No, I think I saw it like on some of I don't know, the different things I was reading, and occasionally it comes up as Peter. So I'm like, I'm going to introduce you as Peter Campbell. So
All
thanks for
good.
joining me, Pete. How you doing, man?
It's all good. Yeah. It's been interesting being in advertising with the moniker Pete Campbell, especially when Mad Men was so popular and everyone just knew Pete Campbell's like the worst human being ever in advertising. And I had to live with that. But Dave Singh had a funny thing. He said, it makes you well known. People remember your name.
That's
I was
right.
like, yeah, that's a good point, Dave.
That's right. So, all right. So I'm going to put you on the spot right out of the gate.
Mhm.
What was your favorite thing that you ever edited of all time?
Oh gosh.
There's only one right answer, by the way.
Is there only?
Yeah.
Oh, I know what you want me to say. Corey Nathan's short film at
Almost
WDA
exactly 20 years ago, baby.
20 years ago.
Yeah. So I think I've told this story before. So Pete cut a short film that we did. The only reason I know it was almost exactly 20 years ago is because my kid, who's now 20, was like 6 weeks old. And Pete did this thing that I had never seen before. We were like in the Bay. We had 168 hours to cut, to like write, shoot, and cut the entire thing. And Pete does this thing where he's like, okay, how honest do you want me to be with you? There's really not much work to work with here. So there's like one good shot in every sequence, and he's like, he grabs that one shot, and then he like builds around it, and it was just cool, man. Frankly, it really did save the film. We won some awards around the country, and
Oh,
a lot of it
nice.
wasn't because of the act. Well, the writing was good, but it was largely, I would say, 99.9% because of the editing. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
happy to help. Happy to help. Oh, my
Anyway,
pleasure.
so I forget, I know you went to Loyola Marymount, but
Yep.
you grew up in Michigan?
Yeah, Detroit. Grew up in Detroit. You know, definitely. The only reason I came out here was when I was looking at film schools, I had a Jesuit guidance counselor who was, pimping the Jesuit schools on the West Coast. He's like, we got one of those, it's called LMU. I was like,
Wait,
I'd
I
never
don't
heard of
think
it.
I've ever heard that. Pimping the Jesuit.
No.
That's awesome.
But I was intrigued. I was like, yeah, let me check it out. I promised him I would take a look. And then when I visited the campus and met some of the people and I heard about their film program, I was like, this sounds so much better. I mean, their campus is beautiful. The film program, they let you make so many of your own films. You're not making
Hmm.
it as a class like USC or any of that stuff. And that just interested me so much just to get right into filmmaking out of the gate as a freshman, not have to wait till my junior or senior year to do that stuff.
Yeah.
So that was great.
And did you know that? So you knew you wanted to go into film. Did you have a sense of that you were going to get into post-production, editorial, or did you have in mind like directing and writing and
Yeah.
that stuff?
When they did the thing at the beginning of freshman year where they said, all right, how many of you want to be a director, and every hand in the room shoots up and they're like, well, guess up. Maybe one of you will be, but the majority of you are going to be, and they listed all the other positions in the film industry. And I was there thinking like, no, I'm going to be the one. And sure enough, school ended and I was trying to figure out how to get into the industry. And I remember I had a screenwriting teacher who said, if you can sell a screenplay, then the next one you can always ask to direct. So that's one avenue into directing. And I had another screenwriting teacher who told me, if you want to sell a screenplay, you have to write enough screenplays until they stack higher than your kneecap when you stack them on the floor. And so I took that advice to heart. And so right after graduating, I had a little money saved up that I just, from 9 to 5, when my roommates went to work, I would just write scripts all day and then trying to get to that, kneecap mark. And I wrote about 9 scripts that, of course, never went anywhere. I got up to about my ankle. And then just to supplement my income so it wasn't all just going down the drain, a friend hooked me up with some babysitting jobs around Westchester. And That's how I met Kevin Williamson. I was
Oh,
babysitting his twins, and he'd come home after working at he was a trailer editor at Skip Films, and he'd come home and tell me all about his day at Skip and life in the trailer industry, and I was just immediately fascinated by all of it. I was just so hooked on listening to him. I would try to just bend his ear for as long as I could every day. And then he introduced me to Dean Blagg when they needed a babysitter, and then Dean turns out to own his own trailer shop, Winston Davis and Associates. And I babysat for them maybe once. And I remember his wife, Cynthia, asking me about my schooling and what I wanted to do. And I told her, and she said, Dean has an opening for a runner if you're interested. And I was like, yes, anything to get my foot in this door,
yeah.
absolutely. And so I went to WDA as a runner, and
The rest,
uh,
the rest
the
is
rest is
history.
kind of, yeah, sort of history.
So what strikes me in that what that part of the story, because that there's a lot that I didn't know about, but one of the things that strikes me is how full circle the industry can be. Because one is you mentioned that Kevin was working at Skip Film, and now Skip is at Wildcard.
Wild card. Yep.
And he's only been there for a couple of years, right? Because he
Yep.
had his own place and he was, doing long form and he's like just like super genius of this industry. So to have him under that roof is really remarkable. That's one full circle thing. But the Westchester part of it, is that coincidental or had you stayed down in that direction the whole time?
Yeah, I just stayed. We lived in this place in the jungle, or we call it the jungle, but it's this little neighborhood down at the end of Culver Boulevard. And I lived there for something like, I want to say 15 years,
Oh,
senior year
wow.
of college, all the way to about 2015. And then, yeah, coincidentally, when Tommy Malatesta, Tommy Pitt came to Winston-Davis, he was one of the guys who I happened to have a room open at the time. And I didn't know this kid from Pittsburgh at all, but I saw him struggling a little bit trying to find his own place. And after I had a hunch he wasn't completely crazy, I was like, I've got a room open. We're right by the beach. If you want to come check it out this weekend. And he looked and immediately jumped at it. He was like, my God, yes, we're paces from the beach and it's dirt cheap. I'll
Yeah.
take it. And then, we were roommates for 2 or 3 years, I think. And so, yeah, a lot of good times staying in this area and staying near LMU.
So I knew that you guys worked at WGA together. I didn't realize that you had lived together for for 2 or 3 years. That's pretty
Yeah, he,
cool.
he was the type of roommate who was so good that he was only out here as an intern. I think he still had to go back to Pittsburgh or wherever to finish his senior year of college. But when he left at the end of the summer, I was like, I've had so many weird and crazy roommates. I don't want to take another chance. If you want, I'll hold your room for the next, 4 months. And when you graduate in December, if you want to come back out, you'll still have a room open. And so he did. He took it, and yeah, he's been one of my closest friends in the industry for who knows,
It's really too
20
bad that
years.
he hasn't made anything of his career. It's just
Yeah, I know. It's such a shame.
no. So in all seriousness, I was thinking about the WDA days. First of all, I'd love for you to describe the nature of the stuff that you worked on compared to the other two shops you've been at through your
Mhm.
career, AV Squad and Wildcard, because there's quite a difference. But two is what's really remarkable is if you think about the group of people that you were with, and to look at not just Tommy, but there are a number of other people who've gone
Oh
on
yeah.
to like really spectacular success. So I'd love for you to describe your time at WDA a little bit.
Yeah, no, that first shop was amazing in so many ways. The most unique that I think is great with a lot of shops, a lot of this industry of trailer, marketing and advertising that I love is that almost every shop lets the assistants, the runners, the whoever, cut on their own time. If you want to cut for us, cut for us. They're all interested to see who's going to be the next
Tommy
great editor.
Malatesta.
Yeah, exactly. So WDA gave me that opportunity right off the bat, and I took it. I was like, I was there all night long. The second we were done, I was done driving tapes. I was in a bay editing, and I really credit that to, how I got out of the car seat so quickly,
Mm.
like, just because they let me cut. I was cutting. WDA did a lot of
It's like
like,
Sony International.
yeah, Sony International. That's exactly it. And so we were working on campaigns like this Chinese film called Warriors of Heaven and Earth and another one called Kung Fu Hustle. And it was Kung Fu Hustle that I remember I got my first big break
Yeah.
because that was a tough kind of medium to understand. It's very kind of like Looney Tunes, silly martial arts. So it's got the humor element, but it's got these amazing action sequences, but they're very kind of zany and, off the wall like a Bugs Bunny, Wile E. Coyote type cartoon almost. So I don't remember who was cutting on it, but whoever it was struggling a little bit, and then I was just cutting some stuff on the side, and Dean saw some of it, and he's like, "This is actually really good. Can you cut like an actual story trailer for us?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course." So I spent an entire weekend at the office just cutting this trailer, and in my mind, Kung Fu Hustle being, so Looney Tunes-esque, I remember Looney Tunes always using like classical music.
Yeah.
And so I stuck Beethoven's Ode to Joy on there and just went off, and it just kind of all came together magically. I showed it to Dean on Monday. Dean sent to the client. The client loved it. Client sent to Stephen Zhao. He loved it, and I think that was my first like V1 finish, and it went on to become some huge, box office hit throughout all of Asia. And after that, they were like, "Okay, you're not driving tapes anymore. This is your bay. This is where you sit. This is where you work. You're editing full time for us."
There,
And
there was
that
a
was
lot that
that.
I was curious about that piece. Number one, so it does sound like you got the vibe of the trailer very much from the movie, and or at
Yeah.
least you allowed the movie to inspire you to take, to take it to the next level in terms of what the trailer needed, right?
Yeah.
Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is brought to you by the Golden Trailer Awards. Remember, the 25th annual Golden Trailer Awards is right around the corner. It's on Thursday, May 29th at the Orpheum Theater in downtown LA. When you go to goldentrailer.com to get your tickets, apply the code TGTG10 for 10% off your entire order. That's TGTG10. It's going to be fun. Pre-show cocktail starts at 6 and the show starts at 8. It's going to be a party for the whole industry. The Golden Trailer Awards honors the finest in feature film and streaming previews. Again, that's Thursday, May 29th, right around the corner. And it's the 25th. You got to go. And remember that code TGTG10 when you're getting your tickets from goldentrailer.com. TGTG10 for 10% off your entire order. But also, like, so you said you were cutting on your own time, but the when Dean gave you that direction of like we need a story, like how do you even know what that is? Like how do you even know how to what that direction is and then how to execute it?
Yeah. And in the beginning, it was really just, maybe it was film school, maybe it was, I don't know what. That first trailer, I just remember the first thing I'd cut for it was just kind of like a silly, I think I cut to a piano piece by Liszt, and it was just montage editing. There was no
Okay.
story. It was just fun editing.
Yeah.
And he, said, "This is kind of cool, but we need something that has a little bit more story." So I remember just finding a unique moment, set up. I think I came up with the script. Maybe Dean gave it to me, or maybe we worked it in my head. I don't remember, but it's just a very basic script. There's these people who fought off all these opponents, and now they're about to come up to their biggest opponent yet. And then rug pull into Stephen Zhao, and he's a complete idiot, not,
Yeah.
strong opponent at all. And then it becomes very silly. Um, and it just something about that structure just hit randomly. It all flowed very easily. The montage when it happened, it's just the jokes, the stop downs, everything just hit right in the music where I needed. And I don't know. I've had a lot of times in my career where I've been against a deadline or completely just like stumped. And I mean, 9 times out of 10, I have that whole come to Jesus moment where I'm terrible. I can't do this. What am I doing in this chair? Um, and 9 times out of 10, I literally usually like go to Jesus and pray about it. I was like, God, please help me through this. And 9 times out of 10, at least, something inspiring comes out of that. So, yeah, I am a
Wow.
little bit spiritual when I've seen Like I don't have that high of an opinion of my own talent, but usually when I get into a really bad place where I'm so behind the deadline, I am just completely out of ideas and I just have nothing and I'm starting to stress and panic. Like, what am I even doing in this industry? A quick like get on your knees and pray session helps me suddenly come up with something that by the end of the day saves my ass and I go on to still have a career.
So just out of curiosity, do you still have those moments of like, what am I doing?
Absolutely. Every time. I would love to know the person who does who's just like, yeah, I don't have that. I'm so good. I don't, yeah, I have it all the time.
Oh
I
man.
no, it never leaves.
That's so funny. Some of the best, some of the most talented people with some of the biggest, like historically great trailer finishes have that same thing.
Yeah.
That's really something. So I also didn't realize how long you spent at WDA. It was like a 7-year run, right?
It was 2003 through 2011. So
Okay.
whatever that math is, 8 years or so.
7, 8 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember, I think it was Dean who called and said that they were changing kind of the direction of the company. What was it about AV Squad? Like, so I'm forgetting the timeline now, but was AV Squad already AV Squad, or were they still on the come up by the time that you joined them?
No, I mean, I remember when the recession was hitting. No, it must have been after the recession. I remember the recession hitting. I remember all these great guys, like, kind of losing their jobs at WDA, like Tommy and Brian Solomon, and seeing those guys go. And, that was a big bummer because I remember how talented they were. And then those two found their way to AV Squad, and they were the ones who kind of brought me over a couple years later. And I remember there was this moment, it must have been like 2009 or something, where, you know, I definitely knew, AV Squad was definitely on the up and up. Fast and
Yeah.
Furious must have been four. Those trailers were hitting, and just everyone. And what was that one with the really great graphics? It's this one about a bomb in like Europe and Spain. I just remember the graphics were so insanely cool with like Dennis Quaid and all these people.
Was it Vantage Point?
Vantage Point,
Yeah,
thank
yeah, yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yes. But I remember they were doing so many cool things, and then they just started going into their horror stuff. They had like Hobo with a shotgun and all these things that must have been Adrian Case, I think, and Greg Krupka were
Krupka,
cutting
yeah.
that were just so amazing. And then they started to get like their Oscar stuff. I remember Brian Solomon did a fighter trailer for Mad Men. It's this 2-minute fighter trailer that was done to just like the sound of an orchestra tuning before a
Mm,
concert. And it was so powerful that I think it was after Brian Solomon's cut that I was just like, what am I doing here? Like these guys that, I helped teach at WDA are onto so much bigger and better things than what I'm doing here, cutting on, whatever Screen Gems, release or Friends with Benefits international trailer. I was like, I gotta do something different. And
yeah,
so they brought me over to meet Chad. Chad was awesome. Great mentor, took me in at AV Squad. I got to learn from all the talented people there, like Kevin Childress and, like I said, Brian Dietrich, Tommy, Adrian Case, Balderas, Krupka. I mean, they were stacked back then. You think about them now, but even back then they were so stacked with
yeah,
talent.
yeah. Good,
So
good people too.
really
Uh,
good people.
really good people. Now, you've also, so wait a second. I do need to back up here for a second because
Yeah,
you
back up.
listed a bunch of guys that came out of WDA. What I was kind of joking about it before, but what do you attribute that level of success to in terms of like how many of you went on to such great things in the industry? Was it just the kind of creative freedom that you had, the kind of the toy box that you were in or the sandbox that you were in, and then you were just ready once you landed on a bigger stage? Or I don't know, what was it, Robert, Solomon, was it like, just a combination of different ingredients that when you had a big opportunity, you were really
Yeah.
ready for it.
I mean, I think it was the fact that we were allowed to play so freely there, and even if you were, an assistant editor or a runner or whatever, you could still be cutting. You could still be constantly showing people cool stuff. They did a great job of hiring like people who are really passionate about the industry. I remember Solomon being so unique and musically kind of like gifted with the cues he would pick. Not my style of music. He would go for like these really crazy like metal type songs, but in a campaign like, The Shield or The Spirit or whatever else he cut, it was great. Um, Dan Frankel was another one came out of there, was really great. Jeremy Fisher is amazing graphic artist, and I've worked with at Wildcard ever since 2014. But he was the head graphics. I can't really explain it, but I think one thing was I never heard anyone talk about like, can we afford to do this? Is this how we should be using our resources? It was always just people have time, people were a little free. They may as well be cutting or creating or doing something. Like Jeremy would do these graphics that were so, I think about how much they would cost at Wildcard. He'd spend 2 weeks on the title treatment, and you can't put that type of, money into a title treatment unless you're like Deva or someone like that.
Yeah.
Um, we would have, so many different editors just cutting on these campaigns. There were like one or two TV spots just because we could. They weren't doing anything else. Why not cut? Let's send the client ordered two or three. Let's send them six. Send them
Yeah.
seven. Dean never held us back in any way, and he kind of just let us play really hard with everything we got in the shop. And because there wasn't, a huge amount of great projects coming into the shop, whenever something came in that actually got us excited, like, you could kind of feel the energy. Everyone wanted to work on it. Everyone wanted to cut on it. And we just kind of bounced off of each other. We'd look at each other's cuts. We'd help each other grow. It was, I don't know, really tight, close-knit family of people and creatives that just kept kind of internally pushing each other on.
Yeah. And there's something to be said about Dean and Robert when they anticipated a change in direction that they were going. It was Dean that actually called me and Eddie. My brother was working with me at the time. And they said, "Hey, listen, I forget how the conversation evolved, but it was clear that they were going in a different direction. But they really cared enough about the people that were working with them and said, "Hey, listen, here's anything you can do to help these guys." So I thought that was really classy on their part. But the other thing too is on the receiving end. I don't think it's a coincidence. I know it's not a coincidence that a whole bunch of you ended up at AV Squad, not just because they were doing such kick-ass work and really good people. There's kick-ass work being done and really nice people all around town. But the difference was, and I think I've mentioned this before on this program, is that Chad and Seth had this talent for seeing the creative through the credits, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of other people, they need to hire the credits so that they could put somebody in a bay who knows, like hard driving action, or maybe they were doing the fast stuff, the Fast Furious stuff,
Yeah.
like car action type stuff. Like they need to see it on the reel. Whereas Chad and
No.
Seth could see beyond that and
Yeah.
see the choices, like the creative choices an up and coming creative editor would make. So I give
Well,
both
no.
Dean. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing on that, which is very true about what you said, is and Tommy, Brian, myself, I'm sure Dan probably did too, but we did this guilty pleasure of a lot of the work we did would be Sony domestic would finish a trailer for, a movie, or Paramount Internet or domestic would finish Transformers. And they'd send us all the finished trailers and some of the finished TV spots, and our job would be to make international cut downs of those.
Right.
But we have the clean finished footage, we have the splits, we have a bunch of different, elements. Sometimes we'd even get the movie. And Brian, Tommy, and I especially, we would cut our own stuff out of those. We would make it polished. We'd make it look like it was a professional TV spot. This thing never finished, never played on any TV screen in America during any commercial break. But Chad had no problem with that. He knew that some of these, he just said point blank, I had that on my reel too,
Yeah.
100%. And that looks like a great cut to me. Like I don't care if that finished or not. That's an amazing cut. And so we filled our stuff with, spec TV spots that, were not true finishes, but because we had the clean footage and we do our own online, and sometimes we'd ask our mixer friend Andrew to do like a quick little polish mix on it for us just to really make it look good. We'd post that stuff on a reel and pass ourselves off as these editors that had so many more finishes than we ever did.
Yeah. Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is brought to you by Soundstripe. So if you're an editor, a producer, a creative exec, a music supervisor, or even a podcaster like me, if you're a content creator of all stripes, if you will, and you're looking for the perfect library of music and sound effects, check out Soundstripe. With over 10,000 high quality tracks, including music from Grammy winning artists, Soundstripe makes music licensing hassle free. Believe me, I've tried it. I've been on there, I've navigated around. It was really terrific. It was really easy to use. So, with a simple subscription, you get unlimited access to a vast catalog, downloadable stems for creative flexibility, and AI song editing to customize tracks effortlessly. Plus, their seamless integration with Premiere, which is what most of my editor friends are on, it means a smoother editing experience. If you're ready to level up your production game with properly licensed, high quality music and sound effects, head over to soundstripe.com/trailergeeks and save 10% with code trailergeeks. That's soundstripe.com/trailergeeks and code trailergeeks. You know what that reminds me of is when you're doing so the work that you were doing for the international, it's kind of like Karate Kid doing wax on, wax off. You're like just getting your reps in, and
Yeah.
and you're getting oriented in a way to perhaps story structure or
Yeah.
music choices or all kinds of decisions that need to be made, and you're having to do it by reconstructing it in a way.
Yeah.
So when you do have an opportunity to compose your own piece, then you have this frame of reference with in a very tactile, hands-on way. So
Yeah.
that's
No, you,
actually that makes me think of your transition as a creative director, because not a lot of people are able to make that transition successfully. And I'm wondering, because there are very different jobs, very different kind of parts of your brain that you're utilizing, from hands-on editing to higher level producing, dealing with clients, creative directing other create not just editors but all the creatives, the music and the design. So how were you able to make that transition?
that's so there's a combination of things. Number one, I think again at WDA, but then it was Tau. Um, I was always kind of treated, especially towards the later years, as a little bit of a producer. So whenever we'd go on fiber, I would be most of the time, allowed to run the show, talk to the client, do all of that. When I went to AV Squad, very similar. At my first day, I was kind of like, I better probably be quiet here and just be the guy in the machine. And I think it was Dave Singh who right off the bat was like, all right, who is this? Who am I working with? Who is, and I was like, oh, hi, my name's so and so. And he would just address me. He's like, Pete, what do you think of this? And right away, Ashley Sewell would be like, he's talking to you. Go talk. I was like, okay. And so they let me, speak and interact with the clients. And same continued at Wildcard. It was just, I was always, very comfortable talking to the clients. And I never had that fear of like, okay, I've got to just shut up and let the grown-ups do the talking and I'll just do the editing on the machine. So that was that aspect of transitioning to the creative director. I think the other one was the teaching element. I when I was at WDA, I remember, uh, teaching Tommy when he was just an intern, like how to cut down a trailer into a TV spot, and working with Solomon the same way. When I was at AV Squad, I remember there would be certain younger editors who would come my way, or I'd go and look in theirs, and I would just go right into, teacher mode. I come from family of all teachers, so it was very easy for me to kind of just adapt into that. And creative directing, in a lot of ways, it's just kind of, uh, you know, a little bit of teaching and then a little bit of just making sure your editors are really well supported. I mean, I
Mm,
feel like the best thing I always felt like a good producer or creative director will, if they do their job right, they can make up like the missing 15% of a cut. Editors go do like 85%. And any producer or creative director that thinks they do like half and half, it's like you're dreaming, dude. The editor's doing so much of that. Let them cook, at least with the good editors, certainly. But your job as a creative director is to see that 85%, not put your thumbprints all over it and, maybe take it down to an 80 or 75, but like find the little places where it's like, okay, I know how to nudge this up a little bit here or there, and stay out of the way when they're doing something great and, get a little involved when they just need a helpful, objective opinion from the outside.
So I was looking at some of I mean, you've done a lot of great work at Wildcard, and I was looking at some of the stuff that you did as the creative director, and with some really talent because they have I mean, talk about a team of editors.
Yeah.
But I wonder like, is every how do you, is it because of your time in the chair that you have an intuitive sense of when to press the gas and when to press the brakes with certain editors, or is every editor different, or how do you do that? How do you navigate that?
I think such a big part of it is making sure the editor feels supported. If an editor feels like they're getting what they need, they will suddenly feel the confidence to, just go off and cook something up special. So part of that is making sure, whoever's cutting my thing, like I'll make sure, to hell and beyond, they have a good dialogue breakdown. It sounds so silly. If I have to stay up late all night doing the dialogue breakdown myself because the AEs are too busy, I'll do it myself. But I'll make sure my editors have a good dialogue breakdown. Sometimes I'll give them a full visual breakdown just because I want them to know I know this material as well as you do. So if I'm giving you a suggestion, it's not coming from a place of ignorance. It's coming from a place of, okay, I've sat with the material too. I've watched it. I've broken it down like you have. Like, I can be a resource here. I'll give them those things. So then that takes off a huge part of their what might be holding them back. Now they know, all right, this thing's broken down. I have all these great select sequences that Pete gave me. I'll make sure they're very confident on their music cue that they select. We'll listen to cues together. We'll go through all that stuff. Make sure, the custom comes in just the way they're happy with. I try to make sure, yes, I'm looking for something too, but I try to make sure their opinion's always heard and they know, look, as it comes down, here are my thoughts, but I want to know what you're feeling. You tell me what you want, That's always going to trump my opinion
Yeah.
until they do it and they try it out and they show it to us. And then as a group, we say, okay, we tried it and I think we're all in agreement now. It's not working. Let's try something different. But I really do feel, especially when an editor is passionate about anything, that's usually such a great thing to say, okay, go off and cook, do it. You sound like you're really motivated here. Go for it. I may not be getting it right now, but I can tell by your passion that you want to do this. Like, I don't want to hold you back. And sometimes that's where you get some amazing things when you can spy that editor, his special relationship with a piece of marketing or a movie or something, and they just go off.
So as a parent with three kids, there have been times throughout their lives where I was like, I wanted to catch them before they fell because you knew it was happening before they did.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, this is not going to end well. And then eventually you get to the point where you're like, you know what? Sometimes they just got to fall down and go boom so they can learn for themselves.
Hmm.
Do you ever get that like feeling when you're watching an editor? Oh man, this is not going to end
100%.
well.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes, if you have the time, it's like, okay, let them do it. Let's see how this happens. We've
Yeah.
got an extra day on this. If it doesn't work out, we'll have a full day to fix it tomorrow. But, I do need sometimes, there are certain editors that I don't want to say allowed to fail, but just allowed to really push something that was far out that I had a hunch wasn't going to work. But,
Yeah.
after I let them push back on me enough, I was like, you know what? Go ahead, do it. We'll talk about this tomorrow. After you've done it, we'll look at it. And, I'd hope that most of those same editors have gone back and said, like, yeah, we probably should have done it that way the first time, but
Yeah.
thank you for letting me try.
And I guess you've worked with some of the best creative directors in the business. Like, so I want to ask you about some specific pieces because, going through your work, like I can't say, oh, this is a Pete thing, like because every piece I looked at, whether it was when you were editing or now creative directing, like every piece is a little bit different and you kind of cross genre. So, okay, going back to one that jumped out at me was the Martian trailer, partly because it felt like two very different pieces that you were able to weave together. If you remember that, it was trailer two. If you remember that trailer, it starts out with more of a narrative, like the
Hmm.
what's his name, the star,
Matt
shit,
Damon.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Matt Damon.
His
Uh,
quiet monologue.
yeah, the quiet monologue, but it had these disruptions of that like
Yeah.
disruptive kind of jarring, not really music, but just like sound.
Yeah.
And that was you were setting it up, but then you have like you're sort of teasing along the watchtower, and it like because you recognize the reference. It was like more of a musical reference to Watchtower. Before and it like did it. I forget how many times. It had to be 3 or 4 times, and then you let the music go, and that was like a whole other piece. You just like
Yeah.
then you were off to the races. So I don't know, man. Is that like it wasn't a form like Act One, Act Two, Act Three that I had seen before. Is that something that kind of happens uh, just magically? Like, how does that? Is that the
Yeah.
influence of the creative executive and your creative director? And like, how does that all come together that way?
I mean, honestly, if there's one thing I'm influenced by, it's the rest of the industry. When I was at Winston Davis, you know, it was not like AV Squad. At AV Squad, you could look around at all the different offlines and be so influenced and inspired by what everyone else in the bays next to you were cutting. There wasn't that big of a pool at WDA, and we weren't working on that great a project sometimes at WDA. So it's hard to be influenced by that. But I would collect trailers on the side, and I had a trailer collection of like probably 2,000 trailers by the end, and I would
Wow.
just watch them and dissect them and figure out like, well, why does this work? Why is the joke funnier when you stop the music on the third beat instead of the fourth beat, and yada yada, and do all these little and write all these notes on all this stuff. So much was influenced by stuff that even when I look back on some of my finishes, I can say like, okay, the quiet loud thing of the Martian trailer, I've done that in a lot of pieces. That was probably influenced by um, the Dead Island video game trailer, which
Oh,
was this brilliant trailer with this whole reverse thing of, this little girl being chased by zombies. If you've never seen it, Corey, you should absolutely see it. It's probably one of the best teaser trailers ever, and it's for a video game, but it's just so powerful.
and that's
But
the.
that
I want to
was
put it in the show notes. So which one is that?
Dead Island, the Dead Island trailer. Um, but it had this hauntingly beautiful piano cue with like maybe a string instrument like cello or something. And it was just so sad. And and you feel this emotion, and then all of a sudden there would just be this pop of sound. It was just like "Rah," and the zombies like screaming and the girl screaming and running and the breathy footsteps, and then go back to quiet again.
Hmm.
And then it'd be like these pops of very violent sound with the quiet music. And I remember just how like, wow, I get it. Okay, the quiet loud thing. Loud stuff is so much more powerful and impactful when it's coming off of quiet. When you do something where everything's at, like a 9 or a 10, or even like an 11, like Spinal Tap, the 11 doesn't mean anything off of a 10, but a pop of like 9 decibels in sound on top of a 1 is that's huge. That's just going to make you like jump up and listen all of a sudden. The quiet will kind of lull you in, and then the loud pop of sound will suddenly like take your breath away a little bit.
Yeah.
So I remember that's where that came from. The music in that, I loved about Wildcard that the music director there at the time was Marcy Bulkley, and she was incredible at saying, you want to do a custom? Let's go do a custom. And I, never really had that. Angel was amazing, but I wasn't really one of the trailer editors at AV Squad, so I never really had a chance to do much customization work with him. But Marcy would ask me, what are some songs that you just think might be good trailer songs you want to customize, even if we don't have a project for it right now? And she would listen to my thoughts, and she was so open and welcoming. So when I decided to do Watchtower, I mean, I think she had two different libraries on it, do customizations like that. And then I actually blended both of them kind of together. I'm sure it was a nightmare to license for her, but she never held me back at all. She just, whatever I wanted to do, she would let me do, which is
So
so much fun.
another piece that you did that I was curious about, maybe this is a customization thing, is the Sammy Davis Jr. cue in the Mike trailer. Do you
Oh
know what
yeah.
I'm talking about?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
was
yeah.
that so I recognize the music and I recognize and I know the story behind when he was singing when Sammy Davis Jr. was singing that song and how appropriate was that for that particular piece,
Yeah.
depicting Mike Tyson. But the I don't know what you call it, but like the underscore was totally different. Was that the customization?
So that one came already done. So that was
Oh,
another amazing music super wild card, Derek Bibber Aubrey. He did that. He found that cue and it was in a pile of cues. Like they sent me 20 cues. And I was on my bicycle riding in the morning, just listening to all their polls. And when that song came up, I was just like, there's the trailer. I got
this is
it.
it.
Yeah, that's it. That's 100%. I know exactly how this type of footage is going to just sing off of the screen with this type of music. And it was just the perfect like marriage of a cue and a show and the shots.
Another
Yeah.
one that really pulled me into a specific time, not just a specific time, but was the front runner. So it brought us right into that time period, but it also was like the chaos and the stakes. I forgot what the cue was off the top of my head. Forgive me, but that's
Yeah.
when I was watching it. I was just like, "Oh, I'm right there with you." But the other thing that caught me about that trailer, actually, now that I bring it up, is Gary Hart's campaign. I don't know. You're not old enough to remember that probably, but
No,
like
I mean, I did so much research into it because like, gosh, I didn't know about this guy at all. I didn't realize like he could have been
he could
the
have.
Democratic nominee. He probably would have won against, Bush Senior had this not happened.
Yeah.
So,
But also that movie came out in 2018.
yeah,
So for that movie to come out, even that just that trailer to come out that year, what a contrast to politics that was already, in full,
yeah,
this era. I
yeah.
don't
This
want to,
era of politics where scandal is, yeah,
yeah.
such a wild reversal.
I mean, seriously. So I mean, while we're on the subject, Handmaid's Tale, like,
Yeah,
I think was that 2018 as well?
yeah. The Super Bowl spot, I
Yeah.
think so. That sounds about right. Yeah,
Oh man. Yeah, some of that stuff, like we might have to hop over to my politics and religion
yeah.
podcast to talk about that stuff. One of the coolest things about doing this program is I get to collaborate with friends of mine, not just friends, but friends who are the best at what they do, like my pal Brent Allen Hagel, Trailer VO Brent. Brent, how you doing, man?
Wonderful, Corey. And I think, critics and audiences would agree to that.
So, do Trailer VO guys always talk that way, or do you ever break character?
Would never break character. Cocktail parties, they say, hey, can you do the voice thing for us while they all drink a beer?
Do you do the voice thing while you're drinking a beer?
I've never tried. I could probably win an award for that.
Oh, see, you're already breaking character, man. Before, if we go on too long, you're going to start sounding like Gilbert Gottfried or something.
It'll be like this. Hey, yeah, it was the podcast that did it to me. Even.
All right. So before we hit it, we get back to the show. How can folks find you?
BrentAllenHagel.com, Brent, Allen, Hagel, Hagel.com on the interwebs and social media at Trailer VO Brent on social media.
It's a great follow. Thanks, Brent, and thanks for helping out. And now back to our show. But okay, so there was another one that I wanted to ask you about that really contrasted the approach that you took in some of your other pieces, the Independence Day Resurgence trailer. Now,
Hmm.
because I watched so many trailers, I'm waiting for like the drop off and the bang and go hard and heavy all out. That was just like one steady build up.
Yeah.
And it
The
was like
slow burn.
a slow burn. It was
Slow
so
burn.
consistent. I don't
But
see many trailers like that.
no, I mean, you talk about my influences, and I always saw myself kind of for a time, especially those early years at Wildcard, as being trying to be a hybrid of like the Chad Miller and the Nick Temple style. And for me, Nick Temple was the slow burn. If you look at his Battle LA teaser and some of his other work, he would just find that right emotional, kind of very unique sound, very unique song, and he would just kind of slow burn, and everything would feel so important and so weighty and so epic. Um, and then Chad was this, it's got to have attitude and stop downs, and he would mix humor. And I think a lot of Chad's trailers really taught me, how to get something to test,
Mm.
and like how much more a stop down does for your saliency, numbers and stuff like that. Where a slow burn sometimes won't test very well because the audience will watch this thing and it's just a progression with no stop downs, and they get to the end and they say, "What do you remember?" And they say, "I don't really remember a particular part. I just remember feeling like, wow, that's a really big, epic movie." But no scenes probably stuck out on a saliency chart. Where when you do Chad style, they're gonna remember every single like set piece moment and funny moment in a stop down and joke and everything like that. Um, but I also recognize there was a time where I I love the AV Squad like Fast and Furious attitude style that they were doing so much of, but I also like so much of my own personal style was pushing towards this. I want to be more emotional. I want to be more dramatic. I want to be more epic, and that kind of what pulled me more towards Wild Card at the time. And then I realized between the two of them, all right, there's a hybrid here where you can be slow and building and emotional, but also find places for stop down so you can really learn how to make moments land and kind of then go to another level. When you look at all the different levels of The Martian, it starts kind of like a slow burn with this Matt Damon speech, almost like you would expect in a teaser. But then there's a surprise, I'm alive, moment. And then there's a whole intro while the music's building up and another stop down and a joke. And then it gets even bigger and bigger and bigger with more stop downs and jokes. So that's when I was really, Martian, Jurassic World was me trying to blend the two styles of like the AV Squad and the Wild Card and find this happy medium in between them.
Yeah. So I love how you point out that there are so many different considerations, not just for the editor, but everybody who's working on it. Like, how's this thing going to test? Like, even getting to that point, so
Yeah.
you can live to fight another day. One of the things I was thinking of, I was watching The Post, the Spielberg film, and it's so different than a lot of other trailers for Spielberg films in that, like, there's a lot more. You often see only like hints of what's to come, the classic AI teaser,
Hmm.
or even like the color purple going way back. But this one, it had a lot. It had like, was Spielberg on board with all that, or like, how did you get that much?
Gosh, I mean, I think that was unique because number one, we had to educate audiences to what this is about,
Hmm.
because, the Viet, the Pentagon Papers
Yeah.
and that whole story, most of the modern day audience had no idea what any of that is, So number one, we had to explain like this was a momentous time. This is all these government secrets that got out. That's important. So you're doing
And
that
now you'd
education.
have to explain like the news used to come out on these big things called papers, you know.
Exactly. So much more to explain. No, but there was, a lot of times with period pieces, there's an educational component where the audience is going to understand the story. We have to explain to the audience, why this story is important. With Gary Hart in The Front Runner, it's like, oh, he's this far ahead of George Bush. He's a presumptive next Democrat. This is an important person. I know you've never heard of him. He was almost president. You have to kind of set the stage so the audience can appreciate the story. And with the post, we did all these trailers, I remember, that were so linear. It was like, okay, it starts with the Pentagon Papers. These are what they are. They got out. And then we go into the newspapers and we meet Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep. And then we get their whole conundrum. Should they publish? Should they not? And we were doing great with those cuts, but something was always just off. And we kept running into roadblocks somewhere in there. And I remember that process was hard because we had been doing, late night after late night, just getting completely burned down. They kept saying, like, how can we do this? How can we get Tom and Marilyn earlier somehow? And I had no clue. I was just fried. And Nick pulled me into his office and I like just vented for a second. He said, okay, here's what you should do. Uh, Shut down your computer, go home, like get some sleep. I was like, I can't, I I don't make me do this, dude. He's like, no, you just need to like slow down and take a break. And then tomorrow when you come in, like, don't just fire up your machine and start editing. Why don't you go into the theater? We had a theater at the time. He said, play the feature, start to finish, and just rewatch it. And I was like, come on, dude. I have watched this movie 1,000 times. Like, I've been cranking on it for 3 months. Like, we don't have time for this, man. What are you thinking? You know? And he was like, just do it. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And I sat in the theater and I'm watching it, and halfway through, this scene comes on where Tom Hanks walks into Meryl Streep at a dinner party and he says, let me ask you a hypothetical question. She's like, oh dear, I don't like hypotheticals. He's like, well, you're not going to like the right one either. And she's like, do you have the papers? And he says, not yet. And then it's like, oh my gosh,
There
that's
it
it.
is.
That's our first scene.
There
That's
it
where we
is.
should start. Our 2 stars, they bring up this thing. We don't know what it is yet. Then we could explain what the papers are. Then we can get into the linear story. We can do everything else, but we're going to grab our audiences right off the bat with our 2 stars and not some, obscure point in history with these Pentagon papers being stolen. And that's another thing I learned from Nick early on. Nick had such a gift of finding this very unique scene in the movie. It was almost never at the beginning of the movie. It could be the last third of the movie. It could be the very end. It could be somewhere in the middle. But you'd find some very unique scene, and that would be your start. And then you could always reset after the logo or something. But it was so much more exciting just to not start things all the time from a linear place and just feel like you're doing a feature cut down. But really, the second you take something in the middle of the movie and just stick at the beginning, now everything has to kind of get rethought and reimagined in a unique, creative way that just opens up so many more possibilities than just thinking, well, the feature goes A, B, C, D, so let's in our trailer go A, B, C, D, you know?
Yeah. The other great piece of advice that I love in there, it's often when you're so wrapped up in a project or anything, your head's in it, your heart's in it, your everything, your time is wrapped up in it, is, dude, just sleep on it.
Yeah, take a break.
That sounds
Take
like
a break.
Artie too. Artie would tell you that, right?
Yeah, take a break. Get away from it for a moment. Just reset, you know.
Yeah. Good
And
advice. Great
it took me
advice.
forever to learn that because I was the guy who would stay up till, 2, 4, 6 in the morning. I would just get a problem in my head. And, I remember so many of Artie's projects, I'd do the same thing. I'd want to just crunch at it, keep working at it, and it'd be like, eventually I'll solve it. And then later on in life, I learned, I learned this doing some silly, like, what is it? Like some version of like a Sudoku puzzle. I would do Sudoku at night to kind of like go to bed. And sometimes I get so stumped that I would just like pass out trying to solve it. And next morning I wake up and the answer is just like
He's
right there
right
in front
there.
of me. And I was like, God, have I been doing this with my trailer editing? Like just killing myself for hours on end when if I had just gone to bed, I probably could have woken up at 5, 6 in the morning and had it solved
Just
instantly, you
yeah,
know?
just like that. That's awesome. So I love so many of the pieces that you've been creative director on. And one, I got it. We're already almost an hour into this thing, but I got to ask you, dude, how much fun was working on the studio?
Oh, it's a blast. The second
It's
I watched that, I was laughing my ass off the entire show. I thought it was so funny. The only thing that concerned me was, I kept thinking, will anyone in the rest of America get this show? Because I thought the show was just brilliant. Um, and I was so thankful that we got a chance to work on it because, Wildcard's not always thought of as like a comedy shop. I had done the instigators for Chanel at Apple, and that's kind of, an action comedy. And, the editor on the studio teaser, Luke, had done like the second Beverly Hills Cop trailer, that came out recently for Netflix or whatever. But yeah, it was so great to get to work on a comedy and have it be a comedy of that like level,
yeah.
and quality and thinking and just inside industry humor and everything. Um,
But I think you made it accessible to the rest of the country because the treatment of it and a lot of this comes from the show itself, but the treatment of it feels like madcap comedy from the
yeah,
there was just so much about it that really worked. It was kind of a tribute to the show itself, but at the same time a tribute to Hollywood, which the show kind of is in its own way, and it's smart like highbrow humor, but at the same time, madcap.
Yeah.
It's so good, so good, so
No,
so much
Rogan
fun.
and them did such a great job at like balancing that and, kind of pulling back from the earlier comedy days, with the Pineapple Express type humor and,
Yeah.
going in a more mature direction, but still like just I know the idiocy of these, creatives and, how they overthink themselves to death and how they get themselves into all these situations was just so funny to us that it was a lot of fun to work on, a lot of fun to edit. And the creatives at Apple were so willing just to try anything. Like you probably saw I know Craig mentioned the billboard, that they did for that show, where it
Yeah.
was like a blank billboard that said, "Oh, this is what happens when studio execs can't figure out the print campaign in time," or something. And they would let us cut like all these teasers that were in a similar vein. It's like where it's just, the people in the show making fun of like, is this what we should do? Is that what we should do for the trailer? Oh, the trailer's great. Oh, but we have some notes. And then at the end, it's like, sorry, we never got a trailer done in time. We were trying so many off the wall ideas, and they were just on board the whole time, letting us play around with all of that and having so much fun with the material. It was a blast.
So another thing I was really curious about, looking at the Severance trailer and the studio, like how different is it working on a TV series versus working on theatrical?
Um, I mean, from a time perspective, it can be a lot. If theatrical, you're breaking down a 2 hour film,
Yeah.
and then a TV show, sometimes you've got like Severance, you've got 10
Unless it's
hours.
Killers of Flower Moon, then you got
Yeah.
12
Then you
hours.
got 3 hours or whatever. But yeah, no, Severance was, 10 full hours of just amazing cinematography and great lines and great moments and trippy visuals. So it can sometimes be like an embarrassment of riches where you're like, okay, there's so much good stuff. How do we parse this down? But the nice thing about Severance was, I think Stiller and the Apple creatives were very smart about we don't want to give anything away. We want to protect the viewing experience for the audiences. I mean, I love when creatives do that and, they don't want to just throw every bullet in the material at people in the marketing, but they want to preserve. I want people to enjoy this when they see it, and I want it to feel fresh and new to them. I don't want them to instantly recognize every moment and every set piece and every joke. Um, so I thought that was great about Severance was we had some parameters to play in, which helped restrain us so we didn't, just want to throw everything in the kitchen sink into the marketing. But it created, just that hunger in the viewers that they just couldn't wait for season 2. They couldn't wait to see what all these little Easter eggs of shots and moments meant and what that would turn into when they watched the show.
Yeah, so I could keep on asking you about everything that you've ever worked on, but we could that would keep us here for maybe we should just do a whole podcast on your work. That's it. No,
There you
um,
go.
but you know what I want to ask you some fun
Boring.
questions.
Sure.
When so you being not just an accomplished creative director, editor, just a contributor to this work, but a student of it and a fan of it, what is your favorite campaign or piece of creative advertising, or a few of them? Like what
Hmm.
comes to mind when you think about some of your favorite work out there that you didn't work on?
Oh, great question. Well, I mean, Tommy's stuff has always blown me away. Almost anything he's done for A24, and even when he was doing stuff for The Gambler and Creed. Um, I remember like I was a real student of music, I think to a point that in some ways holds me back in a way that Tommy doesn't. And I should explain that. I remember when I was trying to teach Tommy like music editing and way back in like 2008 for like Star Trek or something and being like, do you hear there are measures here like 1 2 3 4 2 2. I'd try to sing the music and get him to understand that timing. But Tommy did not grow up playing 50 million instruments or anything like that. But when I watch his trailers like Gambler, Hereditary, he does stuff in some of his moments with music that breaks the time signature. And for me would be like almost my brain couldn't even handle it. It's like, wait, that's off the beat. Wait, why'd you do that? Stop. It's a mistake. But in his trailer, it works. It suddenly makes you feel like uncomfortable even. It makes you feel a little off. It breaks up, or sometimes it just makes it feel more dynamic. It's not as boring. Sometimes the trailer can just, when it's constant to the beat, can feel kind of like sedimentary and, generic. And his stuff will suddenly do this extra beat in the middle of the gambler guy's like punching a guy in the pool to syncopated rhythm, and then he goes on with the music. I thought all that stuff was kind of brilliant, how because he didn't have that schooling, his brain worked a different way than mine, and it was so much more creative. Um, I think Rowney stuff, James Rowney does some amazing stuff that blows me away every time. I mean, long before like Long Legs, I thought he was doing just some incredible pieces. There's just so many. I mean, I came to Wildcard mostly because of Battle LA. That teaser was so powerful to me when I first saw it. Um, I remember being floored. I'm sure people have said this on this show 50 million times, but Chad's social network trailer. I
Oh
mean,
man, Meisner, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I love just not just the intro of that, but then the wall-to-wall dialogue that he constructed. And, I got so much enjoyment from doing those types of trailers where, yes, there are points where, the wall-to-wall dialogue is kind of, it goes outside of the musical measures, but he always somehow finds a way to make all the puzzle fit. So right when the music needs to shift to a different like level of emotion or something, he's wrapping up one dialogue point, then the music goes up to the next level, and then the next dialogue's starting off. And he's fitting, seven different odd pieces of dialogue into this musically contained, perfectly balanced piece. It just blows me away. And yeah, watching that over and over taught me so much about how to do a really cool wall-to-wall dialogue trailer and get all those moments in there. Um, what is it? Chris Parks, I think he had this Interstellar trailer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I remember that one was someone said something he told them once about you got to find the heart in any movie you're working on. Like there's something that will emotionally resonate, and that's like such a strong, sticky thing to like kind of hold on to. And I would watch that one, and I don't know if it was something about, being a father or something about knowing, Chris's history and what happened with him. But that moment in the middle where, this is a movie about humanity going to space to discover a new planet, but what's this middle anchor of the trailer? It's Matthew McConaughey on the bed with his young daughter, and she's crying, saying, it says, I'm coming back, and she's like, when? And
Hmm.
he doesn't give an answer. They just hold on this moment where he's like, he doesn't have an answer for her. And I don't know, something about that moment. Every time I see it, just kind of gets me a little bit. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
there's that fucking heart again.
Yeah,
There
you
it
got
is.
it. You got it. That
Yeah.
story you told about Tommy and your background in music versus his. So over the years, I had the pleasure of becoming friendly with a guy named John Popper, the guy who plays lead harmonica, lead singer, and the brilliant harmonica player for Blues Traveler. And the first time I got to talk to him at length, he I was curious about something because he came up at about the same time Black Crows were becoming popular and Spin Doctor was becoming popular. But Blues Travel had this thing where they were much more. They played like in that genre, but they were much more. They were pushing the envelope a little bit more, in particular, like with time. Like they did things that jazz musicians would do with time. They'd
Yeah.
go into 5/4 and then go back to 4/4, and and what Popper told me is that it was because of Bobby Sheehan, the bass player, may he rest in peace. Bobby Sheehan was he didn't think the same way that other musicians think. So sometimes he would actually it was kind of a mistake, but kind of not. But Popper and oh gosh, Brendan, the drummer, would catch it and they'd be like, "Oh, okay, we're doing this now." They would
Yeah.
like because they're such a great band live, so they were just like, "Oh, Bobby's just going off right now, so okay, let's just stay in 5/4 now."
Yeah.
So
Let's
it was
do
kind of
that.
a happy accident that some of those things that happen. So pretty
Yeah. No,
cool, man.
I was a drummer growing up, and I remember I joined this jazz band. It was like a Detroit adult jazz band when I was in like seventh grade, and I thought, okay, like I really made it. I can do this. But my style of drumming was so like I needed the right time signature. I needed to like kind of practice ahead of time. I was so just like, kind of by the book drumming.
Yeah.
And I remember there's this little kid there who was the other drummer they hired in the band. He was like 2 years younger than me. And I was like, who is this guy? And this kid got up there and just blew my mind. He did not have any formal training like the way I did. And but he was just so free with his style of drumming. And he would be doing stuff I wouldn't be ever thinking of. Like he would be creating on the fly with
Mm,
the music, whatever the band was giving him, he'd be giving them the drums. I was like, I don't know how to do that. I need to like practice what I'm going to do ahead of time. And this kid was so much freer. And I'm
mm.
always so jealous of people like that kid, like Tommy, who can just like play with the material in such a unique, free way where I'm just like, God. It's like the damn Steve Jobs commercial keeps like hitting me in the head, like think different. It's like
Think different. Yeah.
it sounds so easy when you say it, man, but think different is sometimes one of the hardest things to do in this industry.
Well, you need a little bit of both, I think. You need, as Coltrane said one time that his virtuosity was at its peak when a few things were in place. When one, he was playing with other virtuosos.
Hmm.
When Coltrane was playing with Monk, for example, a brilliant composer and pianist, but also when they were faithful to the score, or at least the movement of the score. When everybody was faithful to that, then there was a lot of freedom from measure to measure, or within the movements he was able to be free as a musician.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I think you need a little bit of all of the above.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that in just the creative process. I mean, that's why I think we do so well with teams and stuff. It's like especially as creative director, it's like stand back, allow the guys scoring doing the trailerization to have their own thoughts. It'd be so easy for me to say like, this is what I want it to sound like. This is the ref. Do it exactly like this. But on that first pass, I almost every time I say like, this is roughly what we're doing, but let me just hear what they want to do freely on their own. Like,
Mm,
let's hear what they come up with on their own because then you get inspired by something they did that you never thought of.
yeah,
And sometimes when you just try to control it all, you can really kind of stifle the creative
yeah,
instead
you
of saying,
constrict
all
it.
right, let's see what everyone else in the team can kind of come up with on their own and like marry it together that way.
All right, I just got a couple more questions. One is I'm just going to ask you to do some rank prognostication. The industry has changed so much over the last few years,
Yeah.
even just in the time that you've been creative direct. Do you start creative directing like 2019 or so, or last?
Yeah. I mean, I started right before the pandemic
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
was, it was like, yeah, this is going to be great. And then the pandemic happened. It's like, just so you know, you're supposed to be bringing in work now. I was like, what a terrible time to start creative directing. Okay, let's do it.
So
So,
how do you see the industry changing over the next year, 3 years, 5 years?
that's a great question. I mean, I used to listen to this podcast a couple of years ago, and I was very kind of bullish on the industry because, people would say all these, doom and gloom scenarios, and I'd be saying to myself, it's like, yeah, but look at how many more campaigns we're working on. Like we never had Netflix making 52 movies a year or whatever they were doing in that one year, and all these new TV shows, and they all need trailers. Like we used to just be, what are the movies the main studios are making, and we're going to do the campaigns for those. And now we have streamers and studios, and they're all doing TV shows and trailers, and there's so much more advertising. On the one hand, it feels like. But at the same time, I recognize like, okay, who's going to be watching a TV spot, you know, in 5 years, and where are those going to play? How many people still have cable, or how many people are even watching TV at all with commercials? And then, how much more prevalent are digital spots going to be? I remember, when digital spots first popped up, I think the industry has always kind of treated them for a long time as kind of like an afterthought. All right, let's turn our traditional TV spot into a frame that'll fit on a phone. But, I think it's really clever how some of the shops like Zealot and stuff have embraced that and done some really cool work in the digital space and made digital spots their own unique creative and how they interact with your Instagram and how they, you know, the graphics involved in those sometimes. It's just incredible. So I see a lot of the advertising we do shifting more towards our phones And as much as it pains me to say that, because I think that's a horrible way to watch a trailer or a TV spot or anything, it just feels like the nature of the industry,
Mm.
nature of people's viewing habits. And I hope, I don't know, I just really hope there's kind of this resurgence of people to going back to theaters and not forgetting how special of a time that is to, enjoy a movie in a common space with tons of other people. I remember when Tara and I went to China way back in like 2011 or something, and her friend there was telling us how, IMAX tickets back then were like $50, $60 a ticket. But for their culture, they were like, yeah, of course. I mean, isn't this amazing? Like, you're going to this thing, you're seeing this amazing presentation with the best sound, the best acting. You look at how much we pay for an opera ticket or a theater ticket and all that stuff, and we're getting one angle the entire time. It's an extreme long shot with and one performance these actors are doing, where a movie is like the best of every world. So many different crafts get involved into creating a movie, and then we get the chance to go to a movie theater and watch it. Like, I can't believe sometimes that, we even complain about the price of tickets, but that's getting lost. People are okay watching movies on their phone and watching it at home. And I just hope that, something turns around there and we realize, gosh, this is a really a special art form that we should be a lot more appreciative of. But
Yeah, but I also think it's also having a shared community experience, and
yeah.
perhaps that will be continue to be enlivened in us, awakened in us, as we've gone through a really weird fucking 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I know. I mean, do people even want to go outside and like mingle with their common man? I don't know, but it is nice. I just remember still that first time I saw Borat in a crowded theater. And I mean, they had the whole ridiculous scene where the two guys are running around naked wrestling each other. I mean, people are falling out of their chairs,
Yeah.
literally in the aisles. Guys were running up and down the aisles like screaming. It was just such a madhouse of this shared collective. The jokes are just so much funnier when you're around 5 million other people laughing,
Yeah.
or like going to the cemetery screenings if you've ever done that and seeing a movie. I'd watch like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and it never hit as funny as when I'm with this group of all these other people who are appreciating it and laughing at it the same way. It's just such a great experience.
All right, so now you get to turn the tables on me. Do you have any questions for me?
Um, okay, when did we first meet? How long ago was that? Was it 2006,
So
2005? When do
it
you
was
think that
before
was?
2005 because Emerson was born in 2005. So I'm guessing we already knew each other for at least a year or two before that.
All right. This is an odd question, so you can cut it if you like, 'cause I don't know how this will turn out. Um, so you were a headhunter back then.
Yeah.
And I know you always promised Dean, like, yeah, all right, thank you for letting me use Pete to cut your thing, but I won't try to poach Pete. Had you poached me back then, what shop would you have recommended me to go to? Or what shop would you have tried to get me to go to?
So I'm trying to think if AV Squad existed yet. I
I don't
don't
think it existed
think
back
they
then, no.
did. Um, or they might have just still been either at the pool house or in the
Sure,
garage at that point. So I'm pretty sure that Mike and Barbara were still rocking and rolling at Ant Farm. I would have. So here's how I can't tell you necessarily where I would have played. Maybe it was with Tim and Benny when they were at running Trailer Park in the Ivar building where Buddha had been until just recently. The way I had already begun doing it by that point because I was still relatively early on in my career is I would gather the information on the individual. So on you, I'd be like, oh, how'd you get into the industry? Kind of like a lot of what we just talked about. How'd you get into the industry? What have you worked on? Who have
sure,
you worked with? But there's a really important question at the end. If you were to consider something, first of all, I wouldn't have this conversation with somebody if number one, they were under contract, or number two, they were perfectly happy doing what they were doing. I had a question before I even got into like a recruiting mode of like, hey, if things cool, you're locked in, or like, and if somebody was like, yeah, man, things are great, we wouldn't even get into the conversation because I respected somebody's, if something ain't broke, don't try to fix it kind of a
sure.
thing. But if we were talking, it meant that you were like considering other possibilities or leaving your options open. And that was the important question. Like, if you were to consider a move, what kind of things would you be looking for? Now, here's another thing. I have less than 1 out of 100 people answer that question with the first answer having something to do with money. Literally less than 1 out of 100 people, maybe 1 out of 200 people, if that. And frankly, when I asked that question, hey, what kinds of things might you be looking for? And somebody said, well, I'm really looking for an extra 15K. I'm like, I probably can't help you, man, because I know my clients, and my clients are looking for people typically for other reasons. So, somebody might say, I'm working on a lot of comedy and I'm dying to work on some action. I'm working on a lot of drama or rom-com and I'm dying to work on some horror. Or they might indicate, like you've talked about, Chad Miller and Tommy and and Nick and all these brilliant creative directors. Sometimes somebody would identify an individual in the industry that they were just dying to work with. And if, okay, great. And then I could call my client and be like, hey, man, if nothing else, this person would love to meet you, bend your ear, maybe point them in the right direction or give them some things to work on. And it was a way to enter into a conversation first, and then a conversation as the first seed or first rung on a ladder toward a relationship, And that's really what it was about. It was a much more human, substantive thing than the transaction of like, hey, I could get you more money, and hey, I could get you an editor, and you know.
Yeah.
So that's really the answer to your question, is like I would have gleaned from you what you were working on, what you wanted, where you saw yourself going, and try to identify not just the right shop per se, but the right people, the right opportunity. And yeah, I mean, just remember, I forget all who I was working with at the time, but like Mojo, I think I was working with at the time. That might have been a cool shop to explore.
Yeah.
But there were some really cool places back then, and it's funny. Some of them are still around, some of them not so much. But the ones that are still around are such different shops now than they were then in so many different ways. So
Yeah.
that's an interesting question. Nobody asked me that quite the way you did. So that's pretty cool.
Well, I remember just because, I mean, I have so many young editors sometimes throughout the years that are always asking me like, should I move? Should I not move? And they're asking me get my opinion on their opportunities and stuff like that. And a lot of the times, yeah, it's a similar thing. It was never for me about the money as much as it was about the opportunity. Like I knew, while Winston Davis slash Tao Creative, as much as I wanted that place to like grow and get to that level where like, okay, we're operating at a level like these other big shops and we're getting these opportunities, you know, what would have happened career-wise with me had I not, worked so hard at trying to make that happen and just, gone somewhere else, like, 5 years earlier or somewhere. You
Mm.
know, and I remember a lot of the other editors always talking about like, ah, you don't want to go out there. It's crazy. You're fibering all the time. You're working all night. They'll do like 57 versions of something before it ever finishes. And it was, a lot of other editors who probably, to their, they're probably right. They'd probably seen this at other shops or they'd played that game and gotten tired of it and, wanted something that wasn't quite so nuts. But when you're young, there's a part of you that's like, I kind of do want that, I want to see what that's like. I do want to work on something, bigger than like these international cut downs or something like that.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's why I was asking, and just being curious about what was the industry like then, because I knew nothing really about the outside industry, for the most part. When I went to AV Squad, I got such a better education on like what all the different shops are like and who's coming out of Ignition and who's the great creative director over here at, Create or Vibe. And, I really understood, all the different shops. But when I was at WDA, I was just getting like little bits and pieces of stories from, guys who had been working in kind of that side years ago.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very different shop. And listen, there's something to be said for that too, because I remember listening to Dean, and he had a partner, Martin Goulet, who was on
mhm.
the print side. They were really, really good buddies, and Robert and Andrew Williams.
Andrew Williams, yeah.
And they specifically picked work that they wanted to be the best at, and do a high level of creative, but it was kind of work. They had this expression, drinks at six. They're like,
Yeah, I
you
remember
know,
that.
it's one thing to at that time, competing with the ant farms and the trailer parks and the ignition, like you said. And I think Kaleidoscope was still, Cimarron was still around.
Yep.
Aspect is still around, but today, but it was a very different version of aspect ratio. And they were like, man, we don't want to do those 3 a.m. things.
Yeah.
Even though you were there on your own time, like they were like, no, man.
Yeah.
So,
So
all right. So before we go, I want to make sure if folks want to look up, I'll put a bunch of links in the show notes so that people can look up some of the trailers we've been talking about. But how can folks follow you online and all the great work that you're doing at Wildcard?
um gosh, I don't know. LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm
Yeah,
sure I've got a Instagram handle that I can't remember the name of.
sure, sure.
So you can post up whatever it is.
Yeah, but
But usually whenever I get some finished, I'm smart to always tag whatever amazing creative team I worked with on it and, post it on my LinkedIn or Instagram. So
cool. Yeah, and we'll give some Wildcard some love in there too. We'll put Wildcard's website in the show notes as
absolutely.
well.
Yep.
There's so much good work coming out of there. So thanks for doing this, man. Really appreciate you. And it's always good talking to you, buddy.
You too. You too, Corey.
You
Good
bet.
times. Thanks for having me.
And as always, please rate the show, review us wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help us in the rankings. Follow us on all the socials. I am at Corey S. Nathan, Corey, S as a Sam, Nathan, at Corey S. Nathan. I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter. I'm not a Twitter machine anymore, but I'm on all the things, Substack included. So check out our awesome sponsors, Golden Trailer Awards and Audio Machine, Brent Allen Hagel, Trailer VO Brent, and Soundstripe. Really grateful to all those folks for helping us keep the lights on. Thank you again for joining us. Now go do some inspired work.